Welcome to This Club Sucks. Grief support for parents after the lasagnas are long gone. I am your host, Melissa Monroe, here with my co-host, Alexandria Seamock. Each week we record our child loss chat on Twitter Spaces, where we explore topics around grief and trauma. Whether you are a bereaved parent, want to support bereaved parents, or exploring other sources of grief, we'll be here holding space after the lasagnas are long gone.
Oh, this club sucks.
I am Melissa Monroe. I'm here with my lovely co-host, Alexandria, aka Dr. A, for Child Loss Chat, to be recorded for the podcast This Club Sucks. Support for grief parents after the lasagnas are long gone. We explore topics around grief. Whether you are a bereaved parent, loved one, or simply realize that exploring death leads to a fuller life, you can join us here on Thursdays at 11 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. Today we're going to be discussing parenting after child loss, and today's guest is the lovely and talented Heather Hammond, who is a parent in my SUDC, Sudden Unexplained Death in Childhood community. I met Heather many years ago because we unfortunately share a similar story. So welcome, Heather. Would you like to introduce yourself to everyone?
My name is Heather Hammond. I'm part of the SUDC group with Melissa. I lost my son in March of 2016, and he was 6.5, and his little brother at the time was almost 4. And so I guess I might have some insight.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I wanted to start with something that comes up a lot with parents, with lost parents, and that is the idea that and not even the idea, the gut-wrenching feeling and experience that not only did you lose a person that you adore, you're losing the promise of their life. You've lost what your family unit looks like. You've lost you imagined yourself going through life with this person. Another issue that I know that this was my big one. My huge one was guilt. If guilt was its own stage of grief, I would have had basically all of my eggs in the guilt basket. And I felt really alone in that. I felt that there was something wrong with me, that I was so paralyzed by guilt. But I found that not only is that common with SUDC parents, when there's nothing to be angry at, when you don't know why your child died, there's no external place to project your anger or direct your anger, rather. And so guilt is often inwardly directed anger. And I really capitalized on that. I didn't mean to, but that's just where I found myself going. And I know that's something a lot of other parents struggle with, and that can really complicate your parenting of other children. Steve, did you have a question or comment?
Hey, Melissa. I could speak if Heather's having some connection issues.
Yeah. Please weigh in. Thanks for coming.
Like Heather and Melissa, I'm also an SUDC parent. I'm a father. We lost our daughter Allie in 2018. We had 2 additional boys since, Tyson and Nathan, born in 2019 and then 2021. And there is definitely some guilt there. I think the 2 things that I struggle with guilt is I can't discipline Tyson to save my life. Like, I feel like I feel like if we have he's a little bit of a rambunctious side. So if we have a bad day, and normally like before with Allie, I would have been, not a strict parent, but I would have been pretty good disciplining. With him, I just sometimes I feel scared. Like maybe this is the last memory he'll ever have of me, and what if this is it for him? And like I don't want to feel that way, so I let him I let him win. I let him slide. So I've kind of have troubles with that. Another like weird thing about guilt is we always wanted two kids. I mean, we wanted a daughter and a son. And once we had Tyson, we tried for a third because then we only had one living, and now we have Nathan. And I feel like if Allie was still here, Nathan would never be here. So it's like weird that I have this like these parallel universes where I have one daughter somewhere and then this other son here, and it's like this weird feeling of guilt that I just can't explain.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm old, so I wasn't able to have. Well, I mean, I had my kids when I was older, and I got pregnant on, basically attempt number one with both kids. So I probably could have, but our marriage fell apart shortly after, and I didn't want to have a child by myself, and I didn't want to rush into a relationship just to have a child. So I don't have the experience of having children after. But I know from talking to so many other parents that 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 feeling that you're describing, Steve, is really, I would say, almost universal. I think, many of us have an idea of what we want our family to look like, how many people it would be. I remember that it was a really difficult thing for me because I kept thinking, I never thought I would only have one child. Even though I was old as shit when I started having kids, I somehow knew I was going to have two kids. It was not really something I worried about. And then I remember walking around the first week or so afterwards, just thinking, I cannot believe I only have one kid, and I will probably only have one kid because it's not, it was very clear early on that we had very different grieving styles, and neither one of us could help it. You don't know what your grieving your child style is going to be until you find yourself there. So yeah, and I just think the guilt in general really colors everything. Like definitely letting the kids slide because you don't want to end on a fight. If to this day, if I have to discipline Grace about something and she pushes back and is upset, I will cry all day, like all day. I'll pull it together for work. I mean, if people don't know that it happened, I can pull it together in front of other people. But the minute someone else is out of the room, I'm bawling. I feel so bad because I can barely function thinking that could be my last interaction with her. Let's try to bring Heather back up again.
Oh, I can relate to all the things that you guys are saying. I think I still struggle with guilt um, over a lot of different things, and I think because we don't have a clear answer, you run through these. What did I do? Was I somehow responsible? Was it somewhere we went? Was it something he ate? Was it something I ate when I was pregnant? All of those things.
And how would you say that it colors the way you parent your surviving child?
I feel similar to how you and Steven said, as far as I probably let things slide. I try not to, but I can see the struggle that he goes through and he continues to go through. And as he gets older, he lost the promise of having a sibling and a big brother. And Um, he's very aware of that. So when he gets upset about something or whatever, I give him a lot of space with that.
Yeah, and I think one of the articles that I'm slowly posting as we discuss, it talks about how I think it's the one I just posted. It discusses how parents often find themselves in kind of one of two camps. Either they find themselves becoming a helicopter parent who's afraid to let your kid go on a slide, go to a sleepover, ride a bike, do normal kid things because you've experienced, the quote, impossible. Or like Steve and was discussing letting your kid slide because you just, you don't want to fight over something stupid and have that be your last experience with your child. So um, I think some people find themselves wavering, uh, teetering, rather is probably a better word, teetering between those two extremes. Another thing that I think that parents struggle with is an increased pressure to make every moment count and to remain grateful for every moment. And then, of course, because we've become experts in guilt, then feeling guilty if this moment wasn't perfect and if everything's not, and then throw in some Instagram shit like that. And then the societal expectation that everything looks like this one corner of this influencer's room, which is perfect. We don't get to see the rest of it. Um, that there's just this massive pressure to make every moment count, and the pressure is self-inflicted, obviously, but I think it's something that's pretty common. Heather, you want to comment on that, and anyone else?
I think that the two extremes for me are, you know, having to make everything perfect, and if it's not perfect, and the helicoptering a little bit, and you don't want to, like you said, the last interaction, that you have with your child, you don't want it to be a negative one. You want their memories to be great. I think I try to overcompensate for Ash having lost his brother so that everything is on a bigger scale, right? We don't just do a little birthday. We have to go to Disney World or, that kind of a thing. And he gets a lot of things he wants. And I'll find myself saying, well, I should be buying for two children. So it's okay if I spend that extra money on him because I'm kind of trying to make up for this loss.
Yeah, I feel that in my bones. I completely understand that. And I noticed we have a couple new people in the room. Hey, Paula. If you would like to speak, I think I've sent a speaker invite to a couple of you, but I know you might be new to Twitter. So I will do it again. If you see a little invite to speak, you're welcome to accept it. You can also stay in listener mode. There's absolutely no pressure to speak if you don't want to and you just want to hang out and talk. If you decide that you want to talk or you just want to show support to the people talking, if you click on the heart emoji, there's some emojis you can throw up. I mean, not vomit, throw up onto the screen. And at the far right, there's a little hand, and you can hit that and raise your hand. And my bouncer, Dr. A, will be tossing out any trolls. Knock wood, we've never had one, but Dr. A is here to make sure that that doesn't happen. So this is a safe place. Okay, so moving on. Another thing, and it's related, is letting go of perfection. So, I mean, this was a challenge for me anyway. I was a massive overachiever. I'm a recovering perfectionist. which is the stupidest thing I've ever said, but it's true. um, so, but if you lose a child and you're parenting another one, and you have that pressure to make every moment count, and you're already full of guilt, you really find yourself struggling with perfection. You don't want to do anything wrong. For Steve and Paula and Heather and I, we didn't even know why our child died. So I think I can speak for all of us. Our heads were split. Like, was it the Tylenol I gave her 2 days ago? Was it tainted? Did I accidentally give her too much? Did maybe her dad give her some and I didn't? Did the water have giardia in it when we went on a hike? What, you just don't know, and your brain is circling with that, and so that there is, I think, this drive to make your parent your parenting quote perfect with any surviving children, which is of course not possible, and in your rational mind you would know that. But study after study shows that your rational mind isn't super accessible after a trauma or even during prolonged grief. So I want to talk a little bit with you guys about how you've experienced, when you've noticed yourself trying to be that perfect parent and how it's affected you and maybe the dynamic with your child. Heather, do you want to start?
I think this is a big one for me because I was already a perfectionist and already kind of set myself up for, you know, the baby books and all that stuff, and everything had to be filled out, and everything had to be a memory, and I wanted traditions and all these things. And that a lot of that fell through. I still struggle with it. I think I still struggle with trying to be not only a perfect parent because of the loss, but also because of kind of a rough upbringing myself that I didn't want to repeat. And so it's kind of a double whammy.
Yep. Same. Heather and I have very similar situations. Actually, we're both single mothers, single bereaved mothers who work and have one surviving child. So our stories are quite similar. Steve, did you have anything that you wanted to add, or anyone else that's listening in?
Yeah, I haven't really thought of that. I haven't really felt that need to be like perfect with them. Like this trip has to be perfect. We have to go to this park and then we have to go here and there. I kind of still like take it as it comes. It's really for me. It's that discipline issue. Like you mentioned how it's like you can either be a helicopter or you could be completely on the other side, and I'm just on the other side. I let way too many things slide that I probably shouldn't, and that's how I feel.
Yeah, I have another brief friend, and also who also lost her husband, and after she lost her husband, who was a dear friend of mine, she said, if I have to be a single parent, I decided I'm going to be a single dad, because single moms think I have to bring these, effing Instagram level cupcakes to this party, and dads are like, fuck it, I'm bringing some Cheetos and dumping them off. So I'm glad that you don't suffer with the perfection thing, that it's really exhausting, and it's really tricky to stop. So, but yeah, the discipline thing is tough, and because if we don't have boundaries with the kids, then that creates its own problems. So I really recognize that struggle, and I appreciate you sharing. Dr. A, and then Heather.
This is a question for anyone who's in the room that's gone through this. Do your surviving children try to take advantage of the fact that they lost a sibling?
That's a great question. Heather, do you want to go first?
I'm not having that experience. I don't think he's learning to, at least at this point, take advantage of that. I more worry about the fact that he's internalizing a lot of it and doesn't really have his own outlet for the feelings and stuff he might have. But I'm not finding him using it as an excuse for anything, at least not yet.
And I don't think mine are old enough for that yet. Which I had a question um, for the other parents. How did you, were your surviving children old enough when it happened, or how did you introduce that to them? Like mine know, they know they have a sister. They know her name. They know her room. We say goodnight to her every night. But I don't think they're old. We haven't. They're not old enough where we've made it to the part where we kind of fully explain it to them yet.
That's a wonderful and heartbreaking question. Thank you, Steve. My daughter was around already. She was 4 when it happened. We followed, and this was something I was going to talk about later in the chat. We with her used pretty much verbatim Mr. Rogers' advice on it, which is really great advice. Short, honest answers, no euphemisms, obviously discussing it in an age appropriate way, and offer happy ways to remember also. This all sounds nice and tidy, but it's a little trickier when you're trying to adapt it in real life. And for the no euphemisms, like saying, we the child went to, and this is no attack on any religion, by the way, but saying, they went to heaven in the sky can be really tricky for a child who takes things literally when they know that their sibling was buried in the ground. That can really cause some problems. Saying, they went, they they went to the big sleep or something like that. That can be tricky, especially for our kids, who most of them did die in their sleep. So the no euphemisms is really important, according to Mr. Rogers. And this is what we did with our daughter, who was 4 at the time. And, I have to say she handled it as well as I could have imagined. You don't want her to have to deal with it at all, but we didn't have that choice. So, she cried when she needed to cry, and she asked questions when she needed to ask questions. But I never really saw her um, struggle much with it or feel bad about her grief. Now, I know that this is a little bit different when the children come after, and that can be a little trickier to know. I think you're probably doing what I would do, Steve, which is just kind of make it a normal part of the family. And then what I did then, and I still do today, is I take Grace's lead on it. I figure, and actually, this is advice that a friend gave to me when talking about sex and stuff like that with kids. When my kids were really little, my friend who had older kids, we were talking about, when they're older and the problems get bigger and more complicated. She said, only answer exactly what they're asking. That as parents, we tend to mess it up because they like, where do babies come from? And we're like, oh, shit, this is not the time that I thought I was going to have to explain, the biomechanics of that's not what they're asking. If they're a certain age, it might just work to say, mommy's tummy. And as they are developmentally able to understand more, they will be able to ask questions. So I kind of followed Grace's question. So she was 4. I knew her relationship with grief and her relationship with her departed sibling would change and evolve as she developmentally changed and evolved. And so I really just took her cues. I kept it something that was open and that was discussed openly in the family. And then I just kind of really looked to her. Heather, did you have some comments on this?
Yeah. So he was present when I discovered that Aiden was unresponsive.
Oof.
He was going on 4. He was a late talker, so he didn't really start talking until he was about 3, and so he didn't really have a lot of verbal skills at that time. I think that made it more difficult for both of us, and so he presented with a lot of control issues afterwards. That's I think his therapist had told me that because this happened, and his dad and I had gotten divorced 6 months prior, so he just had experienced the divorce, and then so he loses his dad, he loses his brother, so he would do all these things to try to control his environment as best as he could, which came out as really messy at 4. But I think what I try to do is I did take him to a therapist. I didn't give any specifics, obviously, because he's so young. Um, I I also tried to take his lead on what questions he was asking, and how much he could understand. There's also a lot of really good grief books for children, and so I was able to pick up some books that were that were age appropriate for him, and we sat and we read them, and gave him a chance to discuss it a little bit. And honestly, the SUDC was really great as far as him also having the knowledge that this is not he was not alone, he was not being picked on. There's all these other kids who have also lost siblings, so that he had a support group as well as I. But we try to really I try not to dwell on the all the stuff that happened so much, and really focus on memories and reminding him of silly things that happened that he doesn't remember. We play videos, and um, I'll just tell him stories about things that him and his brother did, and he hasn't asked a lot of details about the passing itself.
Yeah, Grace was 4 also. Yeah, it's just, I mean, there's no easy way around it, but I do think the sharing happy memories was definitely one of the Mr. Rogers points of advice, and it allows the kid to have an opportunity to know that remembering someone doesn't always have to be, a brutal, emotionally exhausting event. Uh, And it's important for us also, by the way. Um, so thank you for bringing that up, Heather. I very much appreciate it. So with bereaved parents, you have the classic grief responses on the psychological, biological, and social level. I posted an article, a study in the Nest, bereavement experiences after child loss. It talks a bit about the brain changes that happen, the neurotransmitters, all of that kind of stuff that make, and the parts of the brain that are affected. And the parts of the brain that are affected are parts of the brain that regulate sleep, appetite. So all of these things can be, and many times are, disrupted. And then you're trying to parent with all of those with all of those changes. And then when it's a child, when the grief response is because of a child, then there's a special subset of issues that occur. The biggest being that it's just harder to let go. Your child is part of you. And if you are the mother, they were literally in you. And if you breastfed, they were feeding from you. That child was part of your body for, often 18 months or more, depending on how old they were when you discontinued breastfeeding. And they are your genetics. If you're the mother, their cells are still inside you, and your cells are all mixed up in them. They're literally part of you. It's just harder to let go of a child. And no one, I haven't met a parent yet who wants to even consider letting go. I know for me that there was a point where it became very clear to me that, and this was pretty early on, that the acceptance and any kind of letting go felt like a massive betrayal of Alice. And it became clear to me that this is something that could really railroad your life, and really make it impossible to live a full life. So it's something that I really worked on. And I did it by not, I knew I couldn't think of it as I have to get to a place of acceptance. I have to get to a place where I can let it go. I knew that wasn't going to work for me, because there's nothing in your motherly body that wants to let go of that child or accept that your child isn't here. That I knew that wasn't going to work. I knew what I had to do was to keep what I said. I just keep walking toward the love. If there was support, if there was love, if there was acceptance, I kept walking that way. And then any kind of judgment is in your rear view. You don't even see it because you're walking towards the love. And I also walking towards the things and the experiences that I love, which for me meant I was hiking a lot. Like I was literally hiking toward the love. I had to be in the trees. I had to see water. I couldn't see the city all the time. I needed to be in nature. I needed to be in water. I needed to read. I'm a nerd. I have to like read the sciencey shit that turns me on in quiet places. These were the things I had to do to even want to be here. And so as I committed myself to those things and didn't make it something that I'll do it when I have time, because I have to do this for Grace, and I have to do this for my patients, and I have to do this for my friend, and I had to do it first. I knew I had to do it first. I had to do that first. And as I did that, I accidentally came to some sort of acceptance. But it's not something that I don't believe any parent wants to say, I'm working on letting it go. Uh, any comments on that, Heather or Steve?
I think the thing that you posted yesterday was great about, not using the word recovery, but reconciliation.
Yes.
I loved that because I I physically bristle at the idea of recovery. That I'm somehow, with time, it's gonna be fine that this happened. It's gonna be learn to let go. I'm never gonna learn to let go. It's it's the same as any parent that has a living child. You don't just let them go one day. They're always your child. So I like the idea that I've learned to get more tools in my toolbox and use those tools to reconcile it and to find ways to integrate it into my life.
Yeah, absolutely. The other problem with recovery is it continues the pathologizing grief, which is not a pathology at all. Grief is a normal, natural response to the loss of someone or something or that you love. Pathologizing that really does a disservice. Look, you're on this spinning rock long enough, you're going to lose some people. that you love. There's no way, unless you. Alice was two. Alice got out of here without losing anyone she loved. The rest of us are gonna have to, at some point or another, we're gonna grieve, and we're gonna have to figure out how to sort that out. And we don't really live in a society that. Well, we live in a society that pathologizes it, which is a problem. So yes, I agree. I love the idea of reconciliation rather than recovery. Rachel and then Steve.
Oh, thank you. Well, first, I want to say you all have so much courage and bravery, and my hat's off to you. I am a parent. Excuse me. Sorry. I have two children. They're now 23 and 16. And I'm with a man who lost two children. His ex-wife was having twins, and at about 7 months, they became stillborn, and that was pretty much the end of their marriage. And yeah, really, really hard. And what I wanted to talk to, though, was I certainly can't understand what that feels like at all. So I'm not in any way, shape, or form trying to say that. But I do see some similarities in the grieving process as a childhood sexual abuse survivor. And I too, I'm glad that you brought that up, Melissa and Heather. I too rejected the term recovery because people will say, well, are you in recovery? And it's like, I've been in recovery my whole damn life since it happened, right? So, but I know that what they're talking about is active trauma recovery. And that can be very different than the grieving process itself. And the other thing that I wanted to add is I lost a former love about 10 years ago to suicide. And we weren't together at the time. He was from my younger years, but we were very much in love and blah, blah, blah. And it didn't work out. And I think the one thing that nobody tells you is how you're supposed to grieve. There is no one perfect way. I think a lot of us are just doing the best we possibly can given the circumstances that we have lived through. And in some ways, everybody is dealing with some kind of trauma, not to minimize or dismiss at all what you are going through. I mean, it's got to be so incredibly difficult to pick up and move on. I just can't even imagine. But I just wanted to add in there that I do see a lot of those sort of grief things happening, and understanding that recovery doesn't, like, you're never fully recovered. I don't think you can heal. You can be stronger. You can be positive. You can be in a great relationship or completely empoweringly single, whatever works for you, whatever, makes you happy. But I just wanted to say, I do see some similarities there. And I understand. I totally rejected the term recovery because I thought, well, I'm not an addict. I don't need to be in alcohol or drug recovery. And that was my own ignorance. Now that I understand more about it, and I'm actually going to go through a 6-month certification for trauma recovery. It starts next week. I'm very excited about it. But I think learning and understanding so much more about these types of traumas makes us more compassionate with each other. And that's really the main important thing I wanted to share. So thank you for everybody for sharing. It's got to be really hard.
Oh, thank you so much, Rachel. You always have so much to add, and you're such a compassionate and well-spoken person. And the work that you do on behalf of sexual abuse survivors is really staggering. Rachel is a force of nature, and I'm so glad that you're here, and I appreciate your support more than I can say.
Of course.
Steve, you've had your hand up.
Thank you. And Rachel, I want to add to that point about different ways to grieve. That's a very good point. You can have different ways to grieve in your own household, and that's okay. We're all on different timelines, and I don't want to say I've moved on, but I definitely feel I haven't let it go, but I feel better. And one of the things I remember with my spouse, it was maybe we were 10 minutes into the whole thing, the paramedics and everything still here, I looked at her and I said, look, if we got to get through this together and stick by each other, otherwise none of it's going to work. So I recognize that her grieving is different than mine, and that's okay. And back to the point about letting go, and I think my situation's a little bit different than you guys, just because we've had the two additional children afterward. And like, to me, it's like we had this cute little family, me, my wife, and my daughter. And now we have this other, like, alternate family of me, my wife, and we have two boys. So it's like, we're okay, but it just, I don't know, like, lacks completeness or something. Or I look at Nathan and I say, okay, in this perfect world, I have Allie. The SUDC never happens. I have Allie, but maybe do I lose Nathan? Do I never get the chance to meet him? So it's just a little bit different on my side, I feel like. But yeah, those are some excellent points.
Yes, and thank you for sharing, Steve. And that's a great point all around. Every case is different. So many people came to me afterwards, like right afterwards, hours afterwards. Oh, I have a friend that lost a kid this way. Do you want to talk to them? I have a kid that, I mean, we didn't know that this was going to happen. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know what was real, what was not real. I was, I was completely shell shocked and traumatized. So I was like, first of all, I don't think I can talk. So there's that problem. I could barely make words come out of my face, which, as you've noticed, I've been able to fix, because now I can go on and on and on. But none of us grieve even different relationships the same way. And so expecting two parents to grieve the same way at the same time, this is a point I've made in many of these chats, to expect two human beings to grieve the same death the same way at the same time forever and ever, amen, is just ridiculous. And we need to just toss that out the window. It's not possible. That said, sometimes people's grief response is difficult for the other one, and then you got to sort out, how you're going to do that, how you're going to give the other parent space to grieve the way they need to grieve, because it's not like we say, I think I will select this grief response today. That's not how it happens. Mostly you're just doing whatever has to happen, and it's going to happen no matter what your brain tells you would perhaps be a more convenient grief response for those around you. So I'm just going to make this final point. This is one I was going to address. I was starting to address. So in addition to the classic grief responses that anyone has in any situation of loss, with parents, it can be harder to let go. There's almost universally a longer mourning period, mourning being like the active grieving, the rituals of grief. There are multiple studies showing that their health risks dramatically increase. There's even genetic changes. There's studies showing genetic changes. The chronic stress and the increased cortisols can kill brain cells. There's the grief processing in your brain. It literally changes your brain. So all of that going on, and then being expected to, putting it on yourself that you've got to be this perfect parent, and you've got to, not be a helicopter parent, but not let things slide, and is really hard and a tough thing to. It's a razor's edge. And Paula, what would you like to say? Hi, Paula.
Hi there. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep. Thank you for being here.
Sorry, I'm going to touch on all the points really fast because it only took me 54 minutes to figure out how to get the speaker to work. One, guilt. The guilt that I have the most, we're 7 years out, is did I think about Lainey today? Did I think and grieve about her enough today? That gets me a lot. To Stephen, we have 2 boys after her death, and I think about little Mikey every single day of I can't imagine my life without him, but I can't imagine my life with not have ever knowing him and everything. I completely understand where Stephen is talking about with having to post after her death. That being said, I will say both Henry and Mikey are both my little ones after 6 and 4 ages, and I try to tell myself every day they didn't know who I was before Lainey passed, so it's not fair for me to project this sad, grieving mom to them every day. Not that they don't know when mommy's sad or when mommy's having a bad day. They totally get that. But I try to make this new Paula to them because they didn't know. I guess I'm saying I don't think it's fair to them to have to deal with my grief, especially since they didn't know who Lainey was or anything of those sorts. The other point I wanted to say is, yes, my husband and I are still together. I cannot imagine moving on to another relationship and having that person understand what I feel that day. That being said, I feel like Lawrence, my husband, and I can look at each other and just have a look at each other of today's a bad day. We don't have to ask questions. We don't have to understand the other person. We just know that exact same feeling. I think that's all I had.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that, Paula. Yeah, it's not my experience, of course, but I imagine that the experience of having a whole different family that where the kids didn't know your previous child is so surreal. I mean, it's all so surreal. I hate, the word is overused, but surreal was made for this conversation, so I'm going to use it anyway. It would be just so surreal. There's no other way to say it, really. And that is a really tough thing to navigate. And I think that Paul, when you're talking about it's not fair to them to see my, I mean, yeah, I think that's pretty universally true. That, for me, I knew that hiding it completely from Grace wasn't going to work. And actually, this is a really interesting story. In the weeks afterwards, right afterwards, you're crying a lot. And it was a really tense day in the house to start with. There was very different grieving styles happening. No one could really help their grieving style. And we had this massive ant infestation. And I don't like killing things. So I had spent like hours trying to figure out how to lead the ants outwards. And it wasn't working. It often works, but it wasn't working this time. And I was going to have to kill these ants, and my daughter just died. And so killing these ants really just seemed horrific to me. And I had to really just, go into the art of war and get very centered so I could kill these frickin' ants. So I'm really focused on killing these ants, and I'm on the ground. And for weeks before that, Grace would come up and say, do you miss Alice? And it was clear to me that when she was asking that, she's 4. So, pretty, they're still very egocentric at 4. And necessarily so. It's not a slam, obviously. She would say, do you miss Alice? And I would say, because it was obvious to me, she was asking, would you miss me if I died? I would always say, yes, I miss Alice all of the time. A mommy will always miss her babies. because she would often ask, like when I was paying bills or unloading groceries. And so I just had the sense that what she was asking is, do you still miss Alice when you're paying bills? Do you still miss Alice when you're putting groceries away? Do you still? So I'm like, in art of war mode, trying to kill these ants and not lose my shit while I'm killing these ants. And she came up and said, do you still miss Alice? And I said, yes, but I guess I didn't tear up this time. Normally I teared up. I said, yes, a mommy will always miss her babies, blah, 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 the same stuff I always said, but I didn't tear up. And she got in my face like a gangster and tipped her head back like Tony Soprano and said, cry. And I was like, whoa. It became clear that she needed to see me cry. So that took off. That helped me release some of the pressure on myself to never be upset in front of her, which I was stunningly I wasn't doing that because that would be my way, but I was definitely trying not to do it too much, and it became clear she needed to see me cry, but I also knew she needed to see me buy groceries without losing my shit, and go to the park and have fun with her without losing my shit. And so it's just a little dance that bereaved parents have to do, and we all understand. We've got to wrap this up in a couple of minutes, but Paula and then Steve.
I just wanted to say, I think there's a couple things. I try to reverse the roles in my head. If I was passing and Lainey was still here, what would I tell her? I would tell her to be strong, live each day as she could, be happy, grieve over me, that's fine, but don't let it overtake your life. And I guess if I would tell her that, I have to live by that example. And so I tell myself that every day, that I can't prove to my boys that you can be strong and make it through if I don't do it.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Paula. Steve, any last quick comments?
Yeah, a quick point. And just because you don't think about her all day, every day, doesn't mean you need to feel guilty about that, too. I mean, they would want us, to Paula's point, they would want us to be happy, right? They don't want us to sit and sob and grieve about them all day. So if a day goes by and you didn't think about them as much as you thought about them the day before, that's okay.
It absolutely is. But guilt is also a sneaky little bitch, and it is often not reckoned with so simply. But it is something that we do have to talk ourselves into and kind of reckon with ourselves. We have to wrap up here in a moment. I had many other points to make, but with this discussion went so well. Heather, any last comments from you?
I really loved what Paula said about the, us showing our children resiliency and kind of a fighter spirit, I guess, that I try to instill this, enjoy each day, enjoy the moments, the small things. It's all important because you never know, kind of a thing, right? But also, fight for your own happiness, fight for those things that are important to you. And we show that by example.
Yes, and with self-love. It's I think for moms especially, I mean, we've come a long way, and also we haven't. It's still really kind of instilled in us to, make sure all these other people are happy, and then you can do your thing. I don't think I'm alone, and I was actually not even raised so much like that. But it's just it gets in there anyway. And when you're dealing with anything big, and all of us are going to deal with big stuff. Not everyone's going to deal with child loss, thank God, but there's sexual abuse survivors. There's there's so many horrendous things happening in the world, and most of us will have to deal with some really unpleasant things in our lives. But we have to put our oxygen masks on first, and we have to, that's an act of self-love, saying, in my case, like, I have to go to the trees or I'm going to lose my fucking shit and I'm not going to be good for anyone, is my act of self-love. And I had to really learn how to prioritize it, B, to verbalize it, and C, to be able to do so without any guilt whatsoever. And it's helped me become a better parent. So there's so much more to talk about parenting after child loss. If you have additional questions, you can add them to the chat. Heather, thank you so much for joining us today. It was lovely to have you. I hope you'll come back again sometime.
Of course. Thank you so much.
And Dr. A, as always, thank you for being my little assistant behind the scenes and my Vinny, and appreciate everyone listening. Thank you, Steve and Paula and Sam and everyone who joined. Jim, hi. I appreciate all of you. We'll be back next week. And again, if you have any further topics around parenting with child loss or around child loss at all that you'd like to have discussed on this program, go ahead and add it to the bubble and we'll get it in the works. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a blessed day. Thank you for joining us today. For more information on the show or my other work, you can check out thisclubsucks.com or melissamariemonroe.com, or you can find me on Twitter at MMeaning. May you experience some gentleness on your path today.